there's so much craziness in the US, in the mainland states, and I tell people we kind of opted out of the US
Yeah.
lifestyle, in like a lot of different
Yeah.
ways. Like we probably won't send our kids to traditional school, and they spend like 4 to 6 hours outside all year long because we can, and they surf and they swim, and there's no screens, like their friends don't have screens. It's like it's just we kind of yeah, we live in a bubble for sure, but like we've kind of created that bubble, and it's kind of nice. And we don't get to vote, so we don't have to think about politics. And so it's just like I don't know. A lot of the really important things that we have here are things that we just want to focus on. Our faith. There's just recently been a church plant too, so that's kind of one of the big missing thing for us down here. Is there wasn't a church we had kind of connected to yet, and since November we've been blessed with that. And so yeah, we love it down here now.
Welcome back to the Dream Support Podcast. Today's episode, I speak with Hunter Durham, who has most recently been involved in a big project in Puerto Rico. CACAO.PR is the website. That was sort of happening at its height when we scheduled this time to talk together. But then since then, things have completely shifted and changed. I think you'll find this conversation very fascinating. We talk about failure in business. We talk about not putting your identity in what you do, but who you are. We talk about family. We talk about faith. We talk about the craziness of life in America and the fast-paced stuff. We talk about a lot of interesting subjects. This is not, to be clear, he is not a client of ours, but just I felt like what he had to say and the interesting perspective that he has based off of his complex history would be very beneficial to the audience here and specifically our clients. So I hope you enjoy. Hey, Hunter, thanks for coming on the Dream Support Podcast to chat with me today about your experience and most recently, the big shift in what's happened in your life. And you noted as soon as we jumped on the call that you've cut off all your hair, because last time I saw you, you had locks, which were like, flowing. So maybe that is attached to kind of life change and what's going on in your life. But I'd love to get a sense of your story a little bit. So can you give me and the listeners here just a little backstory of where you came from? I know there's a lot there. And if you want full story, you can go to Hunter's LinkedIn. You can see all the different companies that he's worked in and different things like that. But just give us a synopsis of what's happened and most recently what you're working on, and maybe what has happened like in the last couple weeks that has disrupted everything, and where you plan to go from there.
Yeah, when we were talking some months ago, and things have changed pretty rapidly. Usually in my career, I have cut my hair when big things have happened. So it was like, okay, I was starting at Facebook and I cut my hair, and then I quit Facebook and I cut my hair again, and I became an entrepreneur and I cut my hair again. I hadn't cut it in a really long time, and over the past month, it was like, I need a reset. It oftentimes gives me a complete reset because I look completely different than, I looked 2 weeks ago. And so yeah, just like quick background, I grew up in Missouri. I have a wife and 3 kids right now, boy, girl, boy. They're amazing. They're surfing and having the time of their lives, and went to school down in Palm Beach University, small Christian university down in West Palm Beach, Florida. That's where my wife and I met. We ended up getting married after my junior year. So I was married, full-time senior year, and she had just graduated after my junior year. And so she was working then. And so, yeah, I mean, at a lot of my career and experience was based during my time in college. Actually, I started with Red Bull to get kind of like a really core brand marketing experience, and they're some of the best in the world. I kind of went to Dell, did a lot on thought leadership, social media marketing with them, working with their enterprise group. And then my senior year internship was with Microsoft, working like a database partner program, accelerating adoption of one of their SQL database products. And that turned actually into a full-time job my senior year. So my senior year of college, I was college full-time, husband full-time, and also working full-time in addition to other curricular activities. And so, yeah, from there, I took a little time off right after school, and we went and traveled in Europe for a little bit. It was really nice to have a full-time job in your senior year of college, especially because my wife had a full-time job as well. So we were like, this dual income, no kids, senior year of college couple. Right. And so, yeah, it was great. Paid off all of her debt within the first year. And then, we still had my salary to live on. It was great. So yeah, and then we moved to Austin, and I started my job at Facebook, worked for about 3 years for them, working with high growth e-commerce advertisers. And then from there, joined my largest client. He was a largest client and really good friend now, and he's a e-commerce guy out of Canada. And so after that, went and kind of became an entrepreneur. The agency grew really quickly. Agency kind of gave me the cash flow to buy my own businesses. Bought three businesses in the furniture space. And those are the ones that ultimately sent me into bankruptcy. Our largest customer was Mitchell Gold Bob Williams. They ceased operations last August and kind of sent us into bankruptcy as well. Kind of all the businesses failed at the same time. I'd already been sharing on Twitter, X, whatever you call it now, a little bit. But once I shared my bankruptcy story, that's where things really took off in terms of content, went viral multiple times over the next couple of months, just like live tweeting the bankruptcy process. I think not a lot of people tweet about bankruptcy during going through bankruptcy. And so I think that's where just a lot of people resonated with it, as well as I think there's just a lot of people going through a lot of hard times right now. And I got to experience a lot of those in my DMs and my inbox. And yeah, it kind of gave me a little platform. And yeah, over the last 6 months, I had this brief stint in the Puerto Rican cacao industry. And that has kind of been what has changed since you and I chatted the first time. Is back in April, I had a late March, I had a tweet kind of go viral about, the incredible things that are really going on in the cacao industry here. And really, I had kind of jumped into it because my friend was just looking for a little bit of support because he had been working on the project for about a year. And so I was like, I hadn't really found a way to guide my audience or anything into anything. And so the goal was really just to help him out. And so things just kind of snowballed after that, to be completely honest. And, as an entrepreneur, you look at all the data and then see where things are working and you just kind of lean into it. I think it's a lot of time what entrepreneurs do. I leaned into it and it was going really well until some of the underlying assumptions were proven wrong and ultimately pulled out of it last month. And so that was a lot of really hard conversations just with investors, myself, my family. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, I still am a steward of their capital. And, that was one of the main things that I was looking at. It was like, hey, do I see a timeline where there is a return of capital and there's a path where it makes sense for everybody? And ultimately, I didn't see it in cacao anymore. And so I pulled out of it and had those hard conversations. And now I'm been working the last few weeks. I go back to what I was good at, where I found, I had a mentor and one of my investors coached me yesterday. He was just like, hey, where were the times in your life that things felt easier, and probably going back into the e-commerce agency space to see where I can support and help out.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a short synopsis of everything that's gone on in the last 29 years of my life.
Yeah, a short synopsis of a lot of things, right? Whenever you have one of these transitions in your life, you cut your hair, you change your appearance, you do something to reset. I think that's a really interesting sort of Samson-like experience where you just sort of, and in that biblical story, he loses his strength and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But for you, what does that do for you when you do that? Is that just like a mental, like there's a physical change that helps me past sort of things or helps me look towards a future, or what is that?
Yeah, honestly, it's probably just something to like trick my brain into like, hey, you need to
Okay.
be a different person right now. I think Sahil Bloom on Twitter has the like alarms that he sets for himself throughout the day, where it's like, he has an alarm that says like I don't even remember what he calls them, but like he has one that he's like, an alarm goes off and he's like, I'm full time now. He has an
Yeah.
alarm in the morning that's like, ruthless business center, whatever it is. I think I just do that more in the physical sense of like, it just is like there, your hair kind of becomes part of you. Especially like for me, I think even more, it's like I became known as the guy with long hair, and at conferences,
Right.
my kids have long hair. So yeah, I think it just kind of changes my identity a little bit, and I needed a little bit of identity change. I think, in just like when things didn't work out, I wanted to kind of change it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned alarms and like having a brain switch.
Mm-hmm.
Then the alarm triggers a brain switch. I think that's an interesting concept. I think it's harder than that in
Sure.
actual, like how
Oh
your
yeah.
brain actually works, because a lot of times I think that's part of what makes like maybe working from home difficult is like
Mm-hmm.
when you're off. It used to be back in the day, right? You had to like drive home or something. So you
Yeah.
transitionary period to kind of
Mm-hmm.
adjust. And so I
Yeah.
have to watch myself because I have 3 kids as well. And my wife and I both work from home. And when I like turn everything off and I'm like, okay, now I'm dad and I'm husband. And when I turn that off, it takes me a minute to cycle out of all my business thoughts, right? And be
Yeah.
present. And because if I don't take a minute to do that, then I'll be irritable. Like I
Yeah.
won't I won't have the right presence of mind. So that's really interesting. That's just something that you have to deal with when you're working from
Yeah.
home. But you're still in Puerto Rico, right?
I don't foresee us leaving Puerto Rico anytime soon. We're still here and we love it here.
Awesome. What first drew you there?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. I mean, my wife and I have always loved travel. We've loved different experiences. And, in the pandemic, my daughter wouldn't take a bottle. She was our second kid, and I was already working from home. And so I was like, does that mean we can live anywhere? I'd studied Spanish in college and we'd done a lot of traveling to Central South America. So we enjoyed the culture. So yeah, when we got the opportunity, we just kind of packed up everything and got an Airbnb. And I said, hey, if you hate it, we'll go back home. And and we fell in love with it. And I think what really allowed us to stay here and just like really fall in love with it is it's just there's so much craziness in the U.S. in the mainland states, and there's I tell people we kind of opted out of the U.S.
Yeah.
lifestyle, in like a lot of different
Yeah.
ways. Like we probably won't send our kids to traditional school, and they spend like 4 to 6 hours outside all year long because we can, and they surf and they swim, and there's no screens. Like their friends don't have screens. It's like it's just we kind of yeah, we live in a bubble for sure, but like we've kind of created that bubble and it's kind of nice. And we don't get to vote, so we don't have to think about politics. And so it's just like I don't know, a lot of the really
Okay.
important things that we have here are um, things that we just want to focus on, our faith. There's just recently been a church plant too, so that's kind of one of the big missing thing for us down here is there wasn't a church we had kind of connected to yet. And since November, we've been blessed with that. And so yeah, we love it down here now.
That's amazing. No,
Hmm.
let's touch on that for a second. Because I think I've seen this viral Twitter formula recently, right? Where someone
Hmm.
talks about a country, like, here are the 10 things I still can't believe that's true about
Yeah.
this country or that country. And it always catches
Yeah.
my attention. There's a picture and there's a list, and I'm like,
Yeah.
show me the list. I want to know the list. So if you were to like retroactively think about the mainland and the 10 crazy
Mhm.
things or the 5 or the 3 or whatever, what would your list of crazy things that you alluded to?
Oh, I mean, I think like the core one is just like the busyness, right? Like there's just this sense that like you have to have something planned at every single time of your day. And I think like that is just, I think one of the most destructive beliefs, right? Of like especially for kids, it's just like we don't wake up and rush in the morning. And I think like part of US society is like you wake up and you rush in the morning, whatever that may be. And so I think that's one. There's not that many things for our kids to do here, which is great, right? Like it forces them to like sit down and be bored, and like there's sports and stuff and we can put them in them, but like really 3 or 4 days out of the week, go to the beach and they, create jungle friends and look for hermit crabs and like learn through nature, and everything. And it's hard to do that in a city, it's just like you're not surrounded by nature. You have to go really hard to like go and search for it. And so even friends, so that was one thing, like we built a bigger community here in Puerto Rico than we did in Austin in 3 years. And it was like, we'd go to church and we'd drive 30 minutes to church and our friends would drive 30 minutes to church. And like, oh, I
Right.
want to see you during the week. But then it's like a 2 hour round trip, to go see them. So then you have to plan everything. And it's like here, like we see our friends probably 3 or 4 times a week because there's like one road, like where we live that like things are on. So it's just like this constant, this sense of community. I think like that's probably the bigger thing in the US. It's like there's just this overwhelming sense of loneliness there.
Mm.
And I think we don't feel that here. And, even living in this very small, town and community in Puerto Rico. And so I think phones and screen times for kids, like that's crazy. I think there was a point where I was like, I can understand some people's viewpoint on it, but I think like at the end of the day, like phones are like drugs for kids, and it's like you give them a
Mm.
little, and then they like don't want any more, and then it's like the 5 minutes didn't satisfy them, so it's like, oh, now you give them like 10 minutes, and then that doesn't satisfy them, and then like, oh, you're to the point where it's like, I need an hour of peace to myself, and I think like one of the best parts about my children, and I can't take credit for it. I don't want to take credit for it, but like they'll wake up in the morning and just like spend an hour to themselves if we want. If like my wife and I didn't intervene, they will wake up, don't even try to knock on our door, and they go find something to play with. And it was like,
Right.
I think that like that's created by environment, and I think there's just like that type of environment, I think, is what we have here in Puerto Rico. And so yeah, I would say the flip side of it, if I like am truly honest, it's like probably not the best career decision to move down here, right? As an entrepreneur, it is, but like there's not as many
Yeah.
resources. It's really hard to do business here. There's part of the cacao story, it's like, but it's the best decision ever that we've made for our family. And making more of those decisions and normalizing those decisions is probably probably a good thing overall. So
So but you moved there not specifically for the cacao
no,
opportunity.
no,
So
we've been
it
here
was more
about
of an
three and a half
experiment.
years.
Sounds like an
Yeah,
interesting life.
we had traveled a lot. I'd studied Spanish, but we never did like a long-term thing. We wanted our kids to be raised in a different environment. We did already know kind of some of those things. So we are like, hey, let's go try it. And then if we hate it, we'll move home. And that's part of the good thing about Puerto Rico is like there's no visas, there's no big headaches that you have to like jump through or hoops or anything to like move here. And so you can kind of float back and forth as you please if you really want to.
I think the big sort of there's two primary things that I think of that are like would prevent me from making that kind of a move. Number one is like family and roots, right?
Hmm.
It's like when you live close to grandparents, cousins, that sort of thing, it doesn't matter how attractive other places are. You'll deal with all kinds of ridiculousness from
Yes.
anything just so you can stay close together. So that's number one. Number two would be like, I've never lived anywhere where there's any kind of real weather, like no weather. Like I live in the Central Valley of California. It's hot, but
Yeah.
we don't flood. We don't have snow. We get to go to
Yeah.
the mountains for that. So drought, yeah, fires sometimes, but they're not too close. So, describe to me the weather situation for you.
Yeah, so weather is like if you look it up, it says like world's most consistent weather in Puerto Rico. It's like 70s in the morning and 80s like in the afternoon. So from like a weather perspective, great. We have hurricanes. We're not going to get out of that. So like that's the big thing is like we just had one recently knocked out power for like a day. We had one 2 years ago that knocked out power for like 9 days. But we have a generator and it's like you kind of just move on
Yeah.
with life. And so it's really the only thing in terms of like weather. I mean, obviously we get rain and stuff, but other than that, like from November to even October to July, it's like the same exact weather every single day for the most part,
Wow. Yeah.
without the risk of hurricane. Then it gets the risk of hurricanes. You get to like
Yeah.
basically August, September, October sort of thing.
Yeah. That's interesting. That would be a hurdle for my family, but very cool that it works for you. I'd love to hear. You mentioned this earlier. You said something about some of the underlying assumptions you had about how the cacao business was going to go or something, but you didn't really go into it. What are the assumptions that you had that you feel like were exposed as false, figured out were not exactly true that caused you to sort of jump out of the business?
Yeah, I think the core of it is it's there's a cultural difference here in Puerto Rico, and when you raise money, there's expectations it's going to grow really quickly. It's going to get really big, and what really big means in Puerto Rico and what really big means in the US, I think there's a pretty like drastic kind of chasm between, what those two things look like. And so, when I raised money, it was a bit under the assumption that like the assumption was really, hey, the cacao industry has been growing here for the last 15 years. It was started 15 years ago. And if we raise money, can we accelerate that at a quick enough pace to where it makes sense with cacao and chaos over in West Africa? And can we build supply on the island? And there were already some groups working on it. So I think the core of it was like, can my skill sets be the thing that brings in more investment to ultimately accelerate the cacao industry as quickly as possible to provide a return to investors at a adequate time period? And what I learned is that most things were going to be out of my control in terms of the ability to get it to a size that was going to return money to my investors. And so I think that was the biggest realization. It's like I realized I could do some of the operations, I could make it more efficient, but at the end of the day, it's like, is cacao the most lucrative crop on the island to grow compared to all the other crops that you're competing against for a farmer to grow? No, even at elevated prices, right? Like there's plantains, or there's chickens, or there's all these competition things. And I think that's where it, you know, for example, there's a law that you can't own more than 500 acres of land in Puerto Rico. So when you're thinking about like an industrial sized industry, and rightly so, right? Like I'm not against the law, and there's been a big past like exploitation on the island and some of these other things. One thing being like they are pretty hesitant to foreign investment. There's a lot of these like intrinsic things about the island which makes it hard to operate under some of those things. It's like, well, if you're looking at an industrial size thing and you can only control 500 acres, and then you have to like, rely on everybody else to kind of do that, it's just like, it's just it wasn't going to be something that I think investors were going to receive their money back in an adequate time frame. And so that's ultimately why I shut it down, is because I felt like there was a better opportunity to return capital using my skill sets in a different direction. So yeah, it sucked. But with that, there's still an opportunity for the local cacao industry to be built, and for people to get a good living, and for it to help change the food supply. A lot of those assumptions of like all the good things, it's just like, at what scale? And is that scale worth it for the next 5 years, to get to X point in the next 5 years?
Gotcha. But it'll happen at a different pace with different expectations or different scale.
Yeah, Juan, the guy. Yeah, absolutely. Juan, the guy who's been working on it for like the last 15 years, has, done an incredible job about, building the industry up, laying the foundation, building the relationships, educating the farmers, all of that foundation. And, I would like to think that I helped support and, push it one step forward. We did a lot of research just on like global supply and demand, and what were the economics, and where do we see that going in the next couple of years? And, I do think we helped overall than hurted, and we injected some liquidity into the overall ecosystem. And so I hope those things kind of help continue it forward, and still have a lot of respect for what Juan and the rest of the, farmers that are doing on the island.
Cool. So you were able to maintain those investors to do your new thing, or go back to the thing or is that like totally different now?
Yeah, no, I mean, the hard conversations with him were the same one I kind of told you. It was like, hey, do I think I can make your money back doing this? Or do I think I can make it back, a more reasonable amount of time doing this? And so that was the same kind of conversations that I had with the investors. And so it's never a fun one, but it was the one that definitely needed to be had.
Yeah, cool. So you mentioned this a couple of times. You mentioned the faith aspect of your entrepreneurial journey. How has that impacted your decisions, what you're about, what you're going for?
Yeah, no, I was actually talking to one of my investors who's been along for both the furniture ride and this ride. And, I think it's a difficult thing. I think a lot of this stuff just forces you to wrestle with faith, right? Of like, what has God called you to do, and what has God put you here for, and what skills and opportunities. And I think in both ventures, it was like a lot of the times I positioned it in my head, if God opens these doors, I'll sprint through them in a lot of different ways. It's kind of like that momentum, I think, entrepreneur, but I'm still trying to discern what these last 5 months mean. It's like, what did God want me to learn and know over these last year? And how does that shape the rest of my life? And how does that shape who he wants me to be in 10 years from now or 15 years from now? I think that's the harder thing that we all struggle with, right? Is I think a lot of the time, especially as entrepreneurs, it's like we focus on the here and the now, and, we don't, I think life is this long game, and it's like, it's hard to know that long game, of how this will show up in 10, 15 years, especially me being young and being 29. And it's like, I am grateful for the just, things that one, he's given me, my family and my wife and all the really important things that really matter. And two, I think just the knowledge, right? Like I think if I look at the last 10 years as I turn 30 next month, it's like, I don't think I'd trade a lot of that knowledge that he's kind of given me the opportunity to have. So, yeah, I think leaning back on the faith, and leaning back on that he has a greater plan and purpose, and ultimately that I'm supposed to walk in that, and I might not know what it is, but continue to just move forward, I think has given me a lot of strength and encouragement, and also just forced me to really discern what those things are.
Yeah, I think that's wise. As someone who has been a pastor, planted a church,
Mm,
closed the church, volunteers at a different church, is now in business. There's a temptation in those transitions um, where your identity can be wrapped into the accomplishment part of it,
hmm.
and you can sort of go down into a bad spot mentally for
Yeah.
yourself. So it sounds like you've been able to sort of create a pattern of fighting through that for yourself and kind of in a moving forward sort of way. So describe to me, how do you separate what you do and who you are, and how do you keep those separate?
Yeah. I think it's even now just like the second failure. For me, I am lucky that some of the other core parts of my identity, like my wife and my kids, existed before any of this entrepreneurial stuff happened. I think that having that foundation helped out a lot for me, first and foremost. But I think also it's just the fact that some things stay the same,
Mhm.
even when you fail or even when you have success. And a lot of times those should be the things that like are your identity. And I think I experienced both sides of those, right? Like the agency grew really quickly. There was a lot of success and a lot of things still stayed the same, right? I still had my wife. I still had my family, friends still loved me and checked on me. And even through failure, a lot of those things still stayed the same. And it was like my wife, my kids and all that were there. And so I think, for me, being able to kind of separate those things about my faith and my family and really knowing that those are what's most important kind of allows me to kind of separate out, what's going on in business or success or how people view me or I did not do. Yeah.
Good, cool. Yeah, I'm always interested to hear, those parts of people's stories. There are a lot of people out there telling you how great they are.
Hmm.
There's not many who will say, "Hey, I didn't get this right, but
Yeah.
I'm still here and we're moving forward," which is most people's story. If we
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
at, they're just no loud ones. So I appreciate you being willing to share some of your story here with me and share it with some of our listeners. The last thing, before I'll let you go, what's maybe the one or two things that you feel like you, is forming? Maybe it's not even totally there, and you're not even totally, you haven't worked it out yet, right?
Yeah.
But there's maybe one or two thoughts, one or two pieces of advice, one or two learnings that you would pass on to people who are, you know, just starting on their entrepreneurial journey or just starting a new product or project. What might be some thoughts you had?
Yeah. I'd say one thing that I've learned is just don't rush it. you know, Sometimes you need to rush it in business. I think like speed of execution is like one of the core parts of business. But I think where I got wrapped up, especially in the first business, is my agency was going really well. And I was pushing for a lot more, something that probably didn't matter. And I think it led me into a lot of just decisions that, probably if I would have just taken a step back, and taken some time to be in prayer or be a little bit more present with what was going well, I think I wouldn't have made some of those decisions. And so,
Mm.
I think it also kind of showed in this one, where kind of, as I mentioned, it was like so many things just kind of happen. It's kind of like a snowball, right? It's like got introduced here, got talked to the government, continued to talk to more and more investors. And so there's this kind of like external momentum. And then I think there's the need for this internal reflection to kind of be paired more seamlessly in my life than it really had. I think leaned on top of this kind of like external momentum in a lot of different ways. And so I think that's something that, has just given me more kind of context on. And I think at the core of business is people, and I think being a good entrepreneur is ultimately a people exercise. And there's a lot of different ways that you can take that, but it's your ability to attract people to a vision is also sometimes the oversight of what their core strengths are, right? Like, even if they're really excited about a project, or even if you're really excited about them, it's like actually knowing someone, actually, discerning something, or how they fit into the vision, I think is just something that I'm continuing to learn, even just being young. It's like, how do you discern people? I think it's like the core of a lot of things. So
Yeah, that's really good. I'm gonna receive that and let that kind of sit with me too. I think, my number one sort of guiding rule in discerning people is we don't work with jerks, basically.
yeah,
Like if someone's treating you really poorly in their communication with you, you don't want to work with them. You don't even, you don't want, it's not
see,
worth it.
that's the easy one, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the easy discernment, right? Like,
yeah.
I think in this process, it wasn't any like bad things, right? It's just like when there is momentum and you need things. I oftentimes just have a really hard time. I think, the like putting the people in the right places is like this hard thing for me. I think oftentimes I'm just like, you seem smart and capable, and you're going to be able to do it, right? Like, and it's like, and probably of my own self, right? You're smart and capable, and you're just going to be able to do it. I think those humbling things are, if you can really start to know thyself, right? I think that's the core of it is, what are your strengths and weaknesses? What gifts have you been given? And how do you lean more fully into those? It helps you be able to discern how to help others lean more fully into those as well.
That's really good. Well, Hunter, if someone was gonna try to reach out to you or follow your story, I assume you go to X.
Twitter's probably
Yeah.
X. X is the best place to find me, especially if you're struggling or you're experiencing financial trouble in the business. Like, I've had plenty of those calls over the last, year that has hopefully helped people put them in the right direction as they go through those times. So I was happy to chat with anybody that's experiencing those difficulties as well.
And then the business that you're returning to, do you have a website that people can check that out?
No, not yet, honestly. I think there's a lot of things still going on in the e-commerce space, and really I have a little time, not a lot of time, but a little time to make sure that it's a need in the market. And I think the core of what I'm trying to discern is like, I also experienced a lot of success just helping people. And so it's like, I'm trying to figure out, like, where can I help people? And so that's what I'm doing
Yeah,
now. So yeah, if you are in the e-commerce space, or that was my background at Facebook, I saw hundreds of businesses kind of during that time period. And so, yeah, I'd love to help or love to chat.
awesome. Well, thanks so much for spending the time with me, and I really I'm hopeful that you will find the right path. It sounds like the wolf is not at the door, as they say, quite yet, and so you have a little bit of time to figure it out. But
Wolf's always at the door in business, I think, though. It's always there. I think at the end of the day, I'm just trying to be as good a steward as possible with the time that I have.
awesome. Well, thanks so
All
much,
right.
and we wish you all the best.
Appreciate it, Micah.